Here we are at last. Mahjong. Probably the most important video game that you've never played. There were 3 system sellers in the early days of the Famicom. Mahjong was the first of them. We'll get to the other 2 in the next few days. You might think that the things that we remember, like the big arcade ports, were the smash hits on the Famicom, but generally speaking, it was the other games that sold well. Mahjong was the 8th best-selling Famicom cartridge of all time, selling over 2.1 million units in Japan. Mahjong was huge. Now, it should be said that this was not the first way to play Mahjong at home against a computer. Portable, handheld LCD Mahjong units existed at the time. Think pocket calculators or Game & Watches that could play Mahjong. Even Nintendo had one that they made contemporaneously with the Famicom in 1983. And Nichibutsu released a console dedicated to Mahjong, although you could plug in cartridges to play other things. But Mahjong was Nintendo's way of getting the Famicom into homes. Sure, kids would buy it for Donkey Kong, but parents would buy it for Mahjong. The very first commercial for the Famicom featured Mahjong as the game that people could play on it. It was the Wii Sports of 1983. And Mahjong became a huge genre on the Famicom. There's over 25 Mahjong games that we're going to see before this is through. Even Nintendo went back to the Mahjong well, with 2 more Mahjong games, including a direct sequel to this one that comes out next year. So what is Mahjong? Well, Mahjong is a whole group of games that are basically set-building games along the lines of Rummy. It's played with tiles rather than with cards, and there's more variations of it out there than you can count. In Japan, the most common version is Richi Mahjong, a variation where instead of just completing a hand that can go out, you want to complete different styles of hands. The Famicom Mahjong is a variant of Richi Mahjong that uses 2 players instead of 4. There are features of hands called yaku, and as you collect the right tiles to complete these, if you have one of them, you can go out. But it might be possible to restructure that hand that can go out right now to get more yaku. And because the game is played with each player starting with a set number of points and then gaining or losing those from other players, getting more and better yaku means a better score. The points lend themselves to gambling as well. Let's take a crash course through the absolute minimum that you need to know to play Mahjong. There are 3 suites of tiles: numbers, bamboo, and dots. These count from 1 to 9. There's other tiles as well, but we're skipping them. There are 4 copies of each of these tiles in a Mahjong set. On each turn, you draw 1 tile from the pile, and then you discard 1. You want to build sets of 3, or runs of 3. You can build sets of 4, but runs longer than 3 do not count. Once you have 4 sets of 3, or 4 runs of 3, you also need 1 pair of tiles. Once you have that, you can go out. There are extra yaku for having things like all tiles of the same suite, the same 3 of a kind in all 3 suites, a full run 1 to 9, generally things like that. You can pick up tiles that your opponent discards if they complete a set. This is called pon if it's a set of 3, or chi if it's a run of 3. You have to reveal the set that you've made when you take the tile, and this can affect some of the more advanced yaku. You can also declare when you are 1 tile away from completing your hand. This will get you bonus points when you go out, but lose you points if your opponents beat you. There's a lot more to Mahjong than that, but just having someone explain it to you can often sound like Captain Kirk explaining the rules of Fizbin. I'm pretty far from an expert at the game, I have to play with a cheat sheet open on a computer next to it, telling me the different yaku that I can go for. And even when I can barely play it, I can recognize that Mahjong's a pretty interesting game. There's a lot of strategy involved, enough luck to vary things up. There's a lot of give and take in how it plays. I can see why it's popular. Of course, there I was talking about the traditional game. The first Famicom release actually strips it down a bit, paring the game from 4 players to just 2. And I think that actually makes it a better introduction than some. A 4-player Mahjong game has a lot more going on, while a 2-player game, it's easier to think of it as an advanced gin rummy. And that, weirdly enough, makes this Mahjong game one of the better ones to pick up and try. Of course, you would have to read a bit of Japanese in this case, otherwise you won't know how to chi or pon. By being a simpler version of Mahjong, this Famicom Mahjong is actually more interesting to play as a beginner. Go figure. Unsurprisingly, Mahjong had quite a few re-releases. It got the same silver box label treatment. It also got a Famicom Disk System version. We'll be coming back to Riichi Mahjong a lot as I walk through the Famicom library. But of the ones that I've played so far, I can honestly say I like Nintendo's best. I haven't played all of them. It's only about 10 of them or so. But this one's been the most friendly one to play. The most accessible one as someone who can't play Mahjong. Maybe that's part of why it did so well.